Hello, my name is Travis, and welcome to another episode of Game Art Reviews. Today I want to talk a little bit about the 3D composition in Bloodborne and why I think it's just so amazingly successful at setting the tone and the mood of the game. So as a quick refresher, composition refers to placement and arrangements of objects in a scene in a way that's both visually interesting and emotionally evocative. And this is tricky enough to get right even when just taking a photograph, but composing a 3D space is even more difficult, because the player is usually in control of the camera. So you have to set up the space to effectively deliver the right feeling to the player, no matter where they move the camera or the character. And on top of that, the space has to be easily navigatable and lend itself well to the gameplay. So, one of the most effective uses of composition in a 3D environment I've seen is in this scene from Bloodborne, which is called The Hunter's Dream. When you're playing through the game and you first enter this location, immediately you're just hit with the feeling that is exactly what the designers want you to feel. It's this sense of dread. It's just so effective at communicating this funereal and deathly feeling. And I could talk for hours about all the myriad different rules for composition that are just so expertly observed here, but to keep the video a reasonable length, I'll just pick the first one that comes to mind, which is emphasis. The moon and the building are the most emphasized elements in this scene, as well as the Pale Lady to a lesser degree. The moon is emphasized by its round shape, which stands in stark contrast to all of the jagged lines seen everywhere else. Also, its size and brightness make it stand out. Plus, it's at the top of the screen, which is important because people notice what's going on in the top half of the screen before they notice what's going on at the bottom half. But why even put the moon there, and why make it the most visually dominant element? Well, there's actually several reasons. First, it creates a really good navigational anchor for the player. Also, it contrasts very nicely with the building that the designers want you to go into. And it's a full moon, which is important to the events happening in the game. Full moons are also sometimes associated with insanity, which I would consider the primary theme of Bloodborne. Also, because it's bigger than we know the moon actually is, it lends a sense of otherworldliness to the scene. If I had to criticize anything, which, hey, of course I do, I'm not fond of how it appears to be in front of the clouds. I know this is an artistic choice, or at least I hope it is. I hope whoever put the moon in front of the clouds knows that the moon is actually further away than clouds are. It's just a choice that I think is more likely to be interpreted as a mistake than an artistic way of messing with your head and making you question if you're seeing things or not. So when you play a bit more in the game, some weird stuff happens with the moon. So that means it's this narrative anchor, as well as a visual and navigational and thematic anchor. The next thing that draws your eye is the building, by virtue of it being the contrast point for the moon of course being the most dominant element in the scene. The paths that lead to the building also help visually guide your eyes towards it, as well as inviting you to explore the building, which, again, is something the designers want you to do. The size of it is, of course, both to make you want to explore the building, but also to make you feel somewhat intimidated. And this is getting into subject matter a little bit more than composition again, but the fact that it has this Gothic architecture really helps with the overall feeling of dread. The designers also want you to talk to the lady, so she is the third thing that catches your eye. She's smaller and near the bottom of the scene, but she stands out because of the contrast in lighting. And she also stands out because she has a face, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but the human eye really is drawn to faces. It just zeroes in on them. But the designers didn't want to emphasize a face first and foremost, so they had to make it a little more distant from where the player first enters the scene, so that the other emphasized elements really have this moment to make their impact. And what's also interesting here is that the designers are using time as a way of creating emphasis. When you first see this lady, she's just an inanimate doll. This gives you time to process everything else going on, and when you come back, she stands out more because of the fact that she's come to life, and that contrasts with your recollection of the scene. So she draws your attention and makes you want to go over to her, and when you do go over, you'll realize that you can talk to her and level up with her help. Next is the paths and the tombstones. This area serves as an upgrade and level select hub for the player, and I know people hate coming back here only to have to warp somewhere else, But the artistic reasons for that are related to how the scene is composed, and by extension, how the scene is meant to make you feel. You select levels by interacting with tombstones, which is a really cool touch, but notice how the level select tombstones are along paths that lead to the building. This placement of level select tombstones in this way is nothing short of genius. It gives the player the feeling of a death march whenever they want to go somewhere. The tombstones that lead to higher difficulty areas are also higher in terms of world elevation and placement on the screen, helping players understand intuitively where the tombstone they're looking for is going to be located. There's also some visual foreshadowing going on in the way that the scene is composed, but I'll leave that to you guys to figure out. So hopefully this, by contrast, helps illustrate the point I made about No Man's Sky. This one tiny area of Bloodborne is way more interesting than any location I can think of having visited in No Man's Sky. There's just so much density of meaning here. Everything here accomplishes so many interesting things, and we're left with the impression of art by intent and not art by algorithm. And we appreciate these details, not always consciously, but they all add up to something very impressive that only gets more impressive the more time you spend looking at it and thinking about it and appreciating it. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like, dislike, subscribe, depending on your opinions of this video, and hopefully we'll see you next time.